one phone to put on the website, and we record on another in order to put on Facebook. So this morning, everybody that's sitting on this side was videoed all morning. So I hope you were behaving yourselves. So I'm sorry, I just had to mention that because you would have seen me up here smiling and laughing, and you would have thought, what is she doing? So Bill, it's only up from here. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce our guest speaker, and you know what, he's not really just a guest speaker, he's a friend of our church, and we're just so glad to have him here. He started out preaching here, I think, a couple of days ago. And so we're just glad that he's here with us today to bring us a message. He's a very humble speaker, but every time his word is powerful when he brings from the word. And we just appreciate him so much. So help me to welcome Mr. Bill this morning.
Does this look okay?
This looks great.
I'm not much on technology. My church, when I first started in Marshall, bought me one of these earphones, and I used it one time. I never saw it again after that. So I don't know what happened to it. It is good to be here. I looked up, and the last time I was here was 2.5 years ago. And, matter of fact, 2.5 years ago was the last time I preached. So I don't know where the sermon's going to go. I don't know. We'll see where it won't go. But it doesn't mean I haven't been in the ministry, because I've been in the ministry big time, just not in the pulpit. Kim and I have been to a lot of different churches in these 2 years, and we've heard a lot of different preachers. And that's something we like to do. And I've heard preachers that know the Bible frontwards and backwards. I mean, they're scholars, and they touch a lot of people. And then there's a group of preachers, and I'll put myself in this group. I'll just say that we have our good days and our bad days in the pulpit. And but when we go to church, both of us were on the same page. We like to walk out better people than when we walked in. And in order to do that, you have to have a minister that tells you what you need to hear, not necessarily what you want to hear. We have a couple of preachers that did that for us. One is an elderly minister up in the St. Louis area where our kids go to church. He's a Methodist minister, and the first time I heard him preach, he just knocked our socks off. I mean, he was wonderful. The second time was just as good, and we were so happy that our kids were involved in a church like that, getting that kind of teaching. A few months after that, they told us that he was retiring. And so, in a deal like that, I know that somebody will come along just as good to help them and be just as good as him. Our all-time favorite preacher is a preacher that's about 2 hours from our house in Rogers, and if he was an hour closer, we would join his church in a heartbeat just to get a part of it and be a part of what he says and what the church does. And I want to give you a quote he gave in one of his sermons that I cannot get out of my heart and my gut. And but before I give you that quote, I want to kind of lead up to that. Whenever Dr. Hogan retired here, I think we filled in for about 7 months, including the Wednesday nights and then the Sundays. We went to this church before we came here, and that church was on fire. I mean, they were having a building program, and after church, they all got together. They went up front, and they held hands and prayed and committed. And then we came here to this ministry for 7 months and didn't go back. After the ministry was through here, we heard that he was speaking over at the New Life Church in Bella Vista, and of course we're going to go hear him, and we did. And it was a marvelous sermon. But before he preached, he made this comment about his church. He said, in the last few months, I had to let some of my staff go. He said, I got so upset that I ended up in the hospital, and then my church split. And we were shocked. We didn't go back for a while. We were kind of afraid to, I think, but we finally went back. And sure enough, the church, when you walk in there, the spirit was so thick, you almost had to cut it with a knife. And we even said, if we're going to get a seat, we need to leave earlier. I mean, it's that good. But here's what he said in his sermon that time. He looked at us and he said, if you all knew everything that I had done, said, and thought, you would not allow me to stand up here and preach to you today. Of course, everybody in that church, including myself, was wondering what he had done, said, and thought. I was. And I thought he was going to tell us. I knew he'd been divorced. He talked about that in his sermons. And I was getting a little nervous. I didn't know if I could handle it. And then he said, or there was a pause, he said, but if I knew everything you all had done, said, and thought, it wouldn't even be worth my time. And I went, oh, God, that hurt. But that's what I needed to hear. And that is so truthful. I think I was raised on some good, hard preaching growing up, and I think that's the boldest, most truthful statement I've ever heard preachers say from the pulpit. I want to talk about a subject today that is right at the top of the list. It's not number one, I don't think, but it's close, of things that we're commanded to do from God. And I think the reason that we have a hard time doing it sometimes, and most of us struggle with it, is that it takes us way out of our comfort zone. And I'm going to use a text of Scripture that I've preached on a few times. I've had it preached to me a lot. It's a very familiar text. I've had it taught in Sunday school. We all have. We know it. But the first time I had this text introduced to me, probably was the most powerful and did more for me and kind of thrust me into the ministry. And I've been there for 26 years. Back in 1995, y'all remember the area men's meeting? They were going great, man. They were fun. Actually, that's how y'all ended up with me here, preaching here through that. And I look forward to those every month. And then y'all had your annual bean dinner. I mean, that was awesome. In November, you ladies were wonderful cooks. Cook up beans and cornbread, a big old slice of onion, and cobbler. We men would go back there and just stuff ourselves and then come out here for church. And one year you asked me to be the speaker there for that meeting. And I've shared this with you here before, is that in my 26-year ministry, I have never been in a more powerful meeting than that one. That thing was spirit-filled, I'm telling you. That was a good service. And in Springdale Christian Church, where I was involved, we had what we called the Galilean service, where we invited church to meet. Anybody here ever go to that? We would invite our area churches, and Dr. Hogan, he was at Bella Vista at the time, and they had a big turnout. We'd meet down at the lake on a Sunday afternoon. We'd play games and eat, and then at dusk, you would have communion. We'd all gather out in a big field, hold hands, take communion, and then after that, we'd go down on the bank and sing hymns, and then all of a sudden, you'd see this cross, a lit cross, coming across the lake. That's all you could see, and it would come, and the boat would pull up there, and a preacher would stand up and preach. It was the most awesome thing I've ever been to. The first year we had that, Ben Killian, I don't know if anybody knows him. He's from, I know him as Ben Charles, because back home, if you don't use somebody's middle name, you don't know who they are. And I think he's been on the board at Cookson. He's retired now, but he preached the first sermon that I heard, and it was just absolutely awesome. The second year, same thing, except this speaker this year was a friend of our pastor, a young man up in Missouri, and he stood up there for 30 minutes, just bam, I mean, he knocked us off that bank with his preaching. And come to find out, my preacher told me, he said, you know what he did, don't you? And I said, no. He goes, he has the whole Gospel of John memorized, and he just gave you back about 4 chapters, word for word, in the form of a sermon. And I'm going, man, that's good. It was good. Third year, I couldn't wait for the third year, because, I mean, this is the most awesome event of the year for me down there. I was inspired by all that. And I never will forget, it was on a Wednesday night in Springdale. We had our meal, and we were getting ready to go out for Bible study. And Jeff Adams, a preacher, minister, came up to me, and he said, hey, Bill, could you help me with the Galilean this year? And I said, sure. I said, I don't think you can improve it much. I mean, we'll invite more people, we'll play different games, the food's great, you don't have to change that. But I said, Jeff, I haven't been back in church very long, and if you'll get the speaker, because you know these guys around here, I appreciate it. He goes, no, Bill. He said, I want you to be the speaker this year. And I said, no, I can't. I said, I can't do that. I said, I know I'm going to your preaching class, and you're trying to train us men to go out and to supply preach and fill in for preachers when they're on vacation and stuff. And I said, my dad used to do that when I was a kid, and I'd go with him. And I said, that fits me to a T. But Jeff, I didn't sign up to preach out of no boat with no notes. I said, I can't do it. I said, I only preached one time in my life. I said, I can't do it. He goes, no, you can do it, and I'll help you. And he walked off. There's about 2 months to go, and he must have written the sermon, because he introduced this text to me, and he must have written all this. But I remember in our class, he'd say, "Now, you need to read some books and listen to some tapes and get you some illustrations, and you need to put it all together in an outline." And I said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." I said, "I can't do it. I tried every way in the world to get out of that, but I didn't." And so the day the Galilean came, same thing. We met, ate, played games, did the communion, and then 2 of the elders got in the boat and headed across the lake to wait till dark. We waited for an eternity out there in that water. Matter of fact, I remember, and I don't know the significance of this, but I looked down there and I wasn't talking. I was in shock. And I saw an empty Budweiser beer can float by the boat. One of the elders reached down and picked it up, looked at it, put it in the boat. And the other elder said, "No, man, put that back in the lake. They'll think the preacher's out here drinking." We said, I don't know the meaning of that, but it happened. Anyway, it was time to go. And we thought we'd waited long enough, but when we got up to the bank, I could see silhouettes running down to the water because we had left too soon. They didn't even get to sing that year. And so we got there and I stood up. I got through this text okay. I got through the part of the sermon okay, a part of the message, and then I made a big mistake. I looked down on the bank and I saw a few people. You couldn't see many because the light was just shining behind me down. And when I saw their faces, I went totally blank. And only by the grace of God did He allow me to pick this message up. It wasn't near as long as it is today. To pick this up and to finish that sermon. And my elders had to help me out of the boat. Couldn't walk. My legs were all weak because it was tough. But it was one of them. It threw me into the ministry. And the lesson I learned, I guess I learned that day from this text, is that God, He will discipline us. He'll never give you more than you can handle. I mean, you can handle whatever He throws out. And He has a great, wonderful sense of humor to put me on that boat. But it was quite an experience. And this is the text that I used that day. John chapter 4, beginning with verse 4. Now he had to go through Samaria, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour when a Samaritan woman came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his flocks and herds?" Jesus answered her, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water that I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of water, welling up to eternal life." It was Charles Dickens who began the Tale of Two Cities with this very famous line. He said, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." And I think that you don't have to look around our world very long today to realize that he could be talking about us, at least the worst of times are. I mean, we're going through a global pandemic that we've never experienced before, and it's changed everything about the way we work, the way we live, the way we do church, the whole thing. We've never seen anything like it. We have racial riots in our city like we've never seen before, and it's horrible. We have drug and alcohol abuse is up. I heard just the other day that alcohol use is up 20%. I'm going 20% from what? 70? I mean, we've always had prayer out of school for a long time, and who knows what they're letting back in school when our kids come back. And some of them have. We have seen some terrible times, and I don't know, and I probably shouldn't even say this, but it's true. I mean, most of us watched the worst presidential debate in the history of the world the other night. I mean, you can agree or not agree, but it wasn't all that great. It wasn't that good. And so these could be the worst of times. But there's also a sense that these could also be the best of times. And I want to just kind of explain that. Because of all these problems that the worst of times have created, I think there's a feeling or a sense that it could also be the best of times, at least for sharing the gospel. When people get down, that is a good way to gap that bridge. I found that out in my chaplain ministry. Some tough old boys, they don't want to talk about any kind of religious thing, but boy, when they're in the hospital and you say, "Can I pray for you?" and they go, "Oh yes, please." And so it's a great time for the gospel. A few years ago, and I don't know what our economy or what was going on, but you remember everybody wanted to get in touch with their angel. Every place you went, there were angel stores and angel books, everything. Everybody wanted their own angel. There was a spiritual craving for that. And I also think that maybe we're getting ready to go through that. And it's a good time for us who preach. It's a good time for all of us who are Christians to be able to reach out to people who are hurting and going through that. All these churches that we go to, they're trying to get their numbers up for our new generations coming up with new music and new programs. And I'm not real crazy about the new music, I'll be honest. I can't sing to it. I like to sing. I just can't grasp it, but I have to get over it because that's what our young people like, and a lot of other people like. But I'm an old hymns type person. I grew up with it, and I know my parents didn't like my music growing up. I mean, I don't remember my dad coming in from a hard day's work and going, "Hey boy, turn up that stereo there. I want to hear that new Led Zeppelin song that they're playing." And I never heard him do that. But he got over it. He accepted it, I think. Luckily, our church music back then stayed the same, so I didn't have to deal with that. But there's just some good signs out there that even though the times are bad right now and they're hard, there's also some signs that it's a good time, especially when it comes to that. This woman at this well that's in our text today, she was a very unlikely candidate for the gospel if you think about it. In fact, this town that she's from, Samaria, it was a very unlikely town to receive the gospel. I mean, this woman, she was so separated from the Messiah. She was separated religiously. She was separated politically. She was a Samaritan. Socially, she belonged to an alien culture. Everything about her, she was an unlikely person at that time for this. But what's interesting in this text is that Jesus saw through all of that, and this woman who seemed to be so unlikely came to know him. If you think about it, for her, it was the worst of times, and it became the best of times. A whole city received, and revival struck the hearts of many in that Samaritan town. You see, what you find in this text, that underneath all those layers, that she was ready for the gospel. The townspeople were ready for the gospel. Jesus Christ, even at great sacrifice to himself, was ready to share the gospel. The only people not ready were the followers of Jesus, his disciples. I mean, they're clueless really as to what's going on here. They're kind of busy with their food. I mean, that's what's important to them. It's almost like they had this little sign, "Do not disturb," around their neck. And so this woman's ready, the town's ready, the only ones not ready are the followers of Jesus. I think that most of us here won't be surprised that when I say this, that we live in a world full of people like this woman at the well. I mean, she had tried it all, and so have we. This woman was searching. She was searching for stability. She was searching for security. She was searching for acceptance and satisfaction that she thought she could find in man after man. And our world today is still searching. And our still searching world is ready for the gospel. I guarantee you. Obviously, Jesus Christ is ready. The question that you and I have to face today, are we ready? In verse 34, Jesus says to his disciples, "My food," Jesus said, "is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Do you not say 4 months and then the harvest? I tell you, open your eyes and look on the fields, for they are ripe for harvest. Already he who reaps is receiving wages and is gathering fruit for life eternal, that he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together." This word ready is a very interesting word. I hear it all the time. We're getting ready to go someplace, come and say, "Hey, Bill, you ready?" And our kids are home, "Hey, kids, you ready to go?" And then you go into school, the kids will go, a teacher will say to the kids or instructor, "Are y'all ready for the test?" It's a very haunting word for some people. Some people are always running about 3 steps behind. They can't ever be ready. You know, they're always running late and everything. I usually don't have that problem because I hate being late, but I never was ready for a test. I can tell you that. So it's a very, very haunting word sometimes for that. And so I wonder, maybe if Jesus doesn't look at us, this Jesus who is always ready, and he says, "You're late. You're late for a very important date, the harvest." You'll also notice in this text that Jesus sets a wonderful model for us for being ready. In fact, it means that being ready will take care of my earthbound distractions, because it certainly did for him. If you think about it, when Jesus sat down by the well, he was very, very tired from a day of ministry. So tired, in fact, he told his disciples, "You boys put on your masks, go down to the fast food joint, get us some food, and bring it back." And while he was there, a woman came, and even though he was tired, his sense of being ready took care of that earthbound distraction, and he found himself energized to meet the needs of this woman. And not only did it take care of the earthbound distraction of his own preference, but also his own prejudice. Those of us who read the Bible and study the Bible and know the Bible know what an unlikely moment this moment really is. This one called a rabbi, this one who calls himself the Messiah, to be talking to a woman, much less a woman of Samaria, much less an immoral woman of Samaria. I mean, the prejudice between these two people went back for centuries. Israel had been split into 2 nations hundreds of years before Jesus came. You had the southern nation, Judea, and you had the northern nation, Israel. Israel had been conquered. Part of its population had sent off to a foreign land, and then part of that population was sent back to the north segment country that we call God's country, Israel. And then the southern part had been captured and taken away. And what a marvelous moment this was. And only by the grace of the king of Persia were Ezra and Nehemiah permitted to come back into Jerusalem, rebuild the capital city, and to rebuild the Holy Temple. And what a marvelous moment they thought for the Samaritans. They come down there and they say to Ezra and Nehemiah, "Let us help you rebuild." And they say, "Not on your life. Look at you. You can't help us rebuild the Holy Temple of God. You've mixed yourself with foreigners. You've mixed yourself with paganism." And they stiff-armed the Samaritans. And that's when it began. Not to be outdone, the Samaritans built their own temple on a mountain that they said that Abraham sacrificed his son Isaac, and also where Moses began his trip to the Promised Land. It was their holy land. It was their Jerusalem. And then the high priest of Jerusalem came and they savaged and they burned the temple of the Samaritans. There is no love lost between these two people. The prejudice of the Jews towards the Samaritans was deep, and the Samaritans hated the Jews. But yet Jesus went beyond that. He went beyond the earthbound distraction of his prejudice, the prejudice of culture, the prejudice of religion, and the prejudice of race, to meet the needs of this woman of Samaria. In that day, the high priest they kind of looked at women, they kind of kept them at arm's length. As a matter of fact, if you were a rabbi, you couldn't talk to a woman in public, you couldn't talk to your wife in public, you couldn't even talk to your daughters in public. I think it was Barclay that said that that rabbis, there was some called bloody Pharisees because they would close their eyes whenever they saw a woman, and they would walk into walls and fences and stuff. And so it was an unthinkable thing for a rabbi to be speaking to a woman. And I think we know what kind of woman this woman was. But the readiness of Jesus Christ took care of that earthbound distraction of prejudice. And also his picnic, because the disciples come back with a bag lunch and he hardly noticed. I mean, he could have said, "Excuse me, man, I'm starved." Or if you'll wait just a few minutes over here, we'll finish this conversation whenever I get through eating, finish my meal. But Jesus is beyond that. His being ready has driven him beyond the picnic. It has driven him beyond the driving force of his physical being. You know, I don't know if there's anybody here who's been in a ministry, preaching ministry, or any kind of ministry, but I'm telling you what, if you do it the right way, He's gonna take you to your limits, to where you don't even think you can move a muscle. You'll be so tired. I was in sales for 18 years, and my hardest day in sales was nothing like my hardest day in the ministry. I know whenever, and then he energizes you. There's a certain energy that comes with that being tired. It's just absolutely joyful. I can't even explain it. I know when Kim and I had a church in Marshall for 19 years. You know, I must have done something really bad for God to put me on a boat preaching and send me back to my hometown, home church for 19 years. I don't know, but we did that for 19 years. We'd get up on a Sunday morning at 5 o'clock. We'd drive 3 hours to church. We'd do church and drive 3 hours home. And we'd be so tired on Sunday night, we couldn't move. I mean, we were almost sick. We called Monday our mental illness day because we didn't do any banking business. We didn't make any kind of major decisions because we made so many mistakes. And Kim would get up and go do a full-time job. And I had a part-time job, even included a Tyson chaplain ministry in that. And you'd be so tired on Monday, you didn't think you could go. And until you'd feel a little better. Wednesday, a lot of Wednesdays before I started Tyson, I'd go back over in Marshall and do a Wednesday night service and get back at 10:30. You know, be a little tired on Thursday, not as bad as Monday. Friday, man, I'm ready to go. Saturday, it's like, come on, Sunday. Sunday morning, about 5 o'clock, I'd go in there, and Kim hadn't got up yet. I'd go in there and shook, and I said, "Get up." And if you think I did that, Bobby, you're insane. I'm also not a morning person, I tell you. She gets up on her own, but when she got up, we got ready to go. Kim plays the piano beautifully, and I don't sing beautifully, but for some reason they wanted us to do that over there. And we practice on Sunday, and we get back in the car and come back Sunday night, and we'd be tired all over again. For 19 years we did that. And there's no way we still to this day go, how in the world we ever did that? Well, we did it because God wanted us to do it. That's where He wanted us to be. And I really believe that He took us past our physical being in order to do it. And He energized it. It's amazing. I say talk about it all day. You almost have to experience it to know what it feels like. And then you have the difference between Him and His disciples. I mean, these guys, they were kind of earthbound in their distractions, really, if you think about it. Because when they see Him talking to this woman, it says in the Bible that they marveled that He had been speaking with her. It means that they were shocked. And they kept on shocked with the fact that they had kept talking, and He kept talking to this woman. I mean, I can't imagine. I wish I had been there and seen their face. They were eating their lunch, and they're looking over at you, and I can't believe he's still talking to her. What an embarrassment he is to us. I hope nobody's going to Galilee and stops by this well and sees us here with him talking to her. Now, they didn't quite have the nerve to call him on it, but they kept on being shocked about it. They wouldn't be caught dead talking to a woman or a person like this. Why? Because their being ready had been buried in the prejudice of their life. I mean, you think about something. I want you to be honest with yourself. Can you think of anybody that you would not be ready to move into their life on behalf of the harvest? Think about color. Think about culture. Think about politics. No, don't think about politics. It's not a good time to think about that. Think about a person or a group of people who have troubled your life or your family's life or our country. I mean, I wonder if our being ready might not be buried by our prejudice. It was buried by the disciples' picnic because these guys are clueless. It's also interesting that the woman at the well, and you got to give her some credit for this, being outside of her culture and everything, but she really can't get this living water thing. I mean, she's saying, yeah, wait a minute, you're going to give me water that I can't even draw? You're going to give me water that I can't even... She's always on this material plane. In the book of John, we're introduced to Nicodemus. John does this. Nicodemus comes to Jesus, and Jesus says, you have to be born again. And Nicodemus walked into the material plane, and he said, whoa, wait a minute, I got to climb back into my mother's womb. He just didn't get it. The woman at the well, she just didn't get it. The disciples, they just don't get it. They say, Lord, lunch. And Jesus says, I have food that you know none of. And here's their classic response. They say, oh, really? Who brought in food? You see, they just didn't get it. They can't unlock their minds from the physical, material, fat world in which we live. I mean, Jesus was dealing with a higher plane. He was dealing with eternity. He was dealing with lost souls. And these guys were busy with their lunch. Now, I know we like to poke a little fun at the disciples, but they can take it, obviously, because they're teaching us something. But think about how many times that you and I are so earthbound in our actions that the readiness or being ready is buried in the busyness and the traffic of our lives. That all we want to do and don't do, all we wish to do to satisfy our own desires and lust, somehow we just don't get it. But being ready will take care of all those picnics. And that's what our disciples were dealing with at that time. And then Jesus cracks this case open and he says something very important to them. And it's at this point that you and I should understand the principle of being ready. In verse 34, it says, when they said, did someone give him something to eat? My food, Christ said, is to do the will of the one who sent me and to accomplish his work. You see, readiness is a matter of appetite, Jesus said. And we're all familiar with appetite, I know that. He said, I have a craving in my life. I have a hunger in my life. And that craving is satisfied when I'm doing the will of my Father and I'm doing the work of my Father. For most of us, the harvest is a concern, not a craving. For most of us, the harvest is a project at best and not a passion. We see it as a concern and we see it as a project because you and I have forgotten that the most satisfying thing in this life is to be about the will of our Father and to make sure that his work gets done for him. Jesus knew that his Father suffered a great loss and that he cared for his loss. A lot of you have suffered great losses in your life. I know the loss of a spouse, child, the loss of a dear friend, and I know the longing that you would have to get them back. God the Father suffered a great loss in the Garden of Eden when mankind was ripped from him, raped from a relationship with him. And all through history, it has been the driving will and work of God to get back what he had lost. And so Jesus is getting his disciples in this position to prepare them to be ready. And he makes it very clear that in the world, there is always a ready harvest. He says, we're talking about appetite here. The table's set. The world is ready. The time for the harvest is right now. And then he says it's a matter of eyesight, verse 34. My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Do not say there are 4 more months and then comes the harvest. Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes. Jesus is saying, I want you to gaze intently. I want you to stare. It's okay to stare whenever it comes to being a harvester. One time, Kim and I were in Branson at the Outlet Mall. I think it was the Bass store, which has since gone out of business because of COVID, unfortunately. But we're sitting there, and I like to shop, but I was just kind of bored that day. Kim was shopping. And I noticed, I think it was 2 women and a man over there, just kind of shopping. You know, I was kind of wondering where they were from. I was looking at them. Kind of wondering which one the man was with. Because they say after we've been married a long time, we start looking like each other, but I couldn't figure that out. I'm just sitting there looking at them. Kim's going, quit staring at those people. I said, it's not what you think. I wanted to say, you know, Jesus says it's okay to stare, but I knew that would fly. It's okay. It is okay to stare, but we got to do it politely. And we have to do it spiritually. Just take away the layers. Gaze. Lift up your eyes. Look at them. And every single time you will find someone precious to God in desperate need of a Savior. And you'll be surprised how ready some of them really are. Readiness is not just a matter of appetite, it's also a matter of eyesight. I love the way Jesus handled this woman, how he dealt with her. First of all, he did it with great confidence. He knew he had the truth, he knew who he was, he knew who she was, and he knew what she needed. Don't ever be intimidated when the readiness of your soul moves into the readiness of another soul who needs Jesus Christ. You know you got the truth. You know who you are. You know what he's done for you at the cross. You believe in hell, that it's real. You believe in heaven, and it's worth the moment. I also like the way he did it in her context. He didn't come to her talking about Jerusalem. He came talking about what she was doing. I like the fact that he did it with great confidence, and he was so patient with her. And I like the fact that he did it with such compassion. I'm going to tell you what, this woman had never met a man like this before. Every other major man that she had met in her life, once he knew what she was like, only saw her as an object to be used and abused for his own pleasure, and you can count on that. But this man cared for her soul, and she was touched by his compassion. I also like the fact that he got right to the point. He didn't want to argue about all the stuff she wanted to argue about. He kept calling her to him, her attention to him, and to this living water that he had to offer. See, when we're ready for the harvest, when it's time to go get that harvest, how important it is to take people to Jesus Christ and to him alone. I mean, don't get sidetracked by all the issues and arguments about religion and stuff that don't count in the long run. And we take them straight to Jesus. That's the confidence that this text teaches. That the sowing has already taken place. The Spirit has already begun its work. And we're just called to go out and bring in the harvest. And so this unlikely woman in this unlikely place was ready. The disciples were ready. The town was ready. Jesus was ready. The disciples got ready. They weren't at first.